Hello, and welcome to the weekend episode of Views of an Outsider, Parenting Our Children, Parenting Ourselves, Part 2, Toddler Misbehavior. Last week we started a new series that is based on the idea of taking the principles of parenting a child well, and then using those same principles to re-parent ourselves. Regardless of whether you were somebody who had great parents, or someone who had parents who were not so great, none of us had perfect parents. So to varying degrees, we all require a bit of a do-over to help us let go of any unhelpful baggage that we are carrying around with us, so that we can be free to rise as high as we possibly can while building a life for ourselves that is full of the best experiences that we can manage to soak up during our time here. There are a lot of people out there these days that are selling one version or another of self-help. But out of all of the experts that are available to choose from, I personally think that Jordan Peterson is the one that it makes the most sense to listen to. As a world-renowned psychologist, he's highly trained and qualified. He has also walked the walk and successfully raised 2 kids who have not only thrived in their own lives, but they still continue to have voluntary, healthy relationships with their parents now that they are adults, which is basically the ultimate goal of the parenting adventure, and one that every parent hopes to actually achieve for themselves. Even though, with 1 out of every 4 young people going completely no contact with their parents these days, it seems like fewer and fewer parents are succeeding on that front. To top all of this off, Jordan's advice has a proven track record. It has worked for thousands of people who have tried it, including his children who are now successfully raising his 6 grandchildren, while also running successful businesses of their own. With a resume that boasts all of those selling points, you really couldn't ask for more when you're trying to decide who to trust. And that is where Jordan's new parenting series comes in. I found it both fascinating and extremely practical, which is one of Jordan's greatest talents. And even though the advice that he gives in his new series is meant for parents and soon-to-be parents, perhaps there are also some insights that we can find when it comes to the best way to set about parenting ourselves. Last week, we took a look at the roles that parents play in their child's life. We considered what the spirit of the mother brings to her child's life and what the spirit of the father brings as well. We looked at the perspectives that they should each try to incorporate into their roles, along with some of the pitfalls that can be avoided if they're properly prepared ahead of time. Then we took all of that information and applied it to the idea of re-raising ourselves to be the people that we each aspire to be. This week, we're going to do the same thing with Jordan's second episode, which centers around toddler misbehavior. Toddlerhood is a brief but magical time in a child's development. Toddlers bring a joy to life that is unlike anything else. What happens during those early years establishes the foundations for everything that comes after it. Likewise, you should pay attention to the quality of the foundations that you are laying for your own life. Starting out on a new journey is also a magical time, and you should try to capitalize on that enthusiasm while it is easily available to you right at your fingertips. But toddlers are also not without their issues. Toddlers are wonderful, curious, joyful little people. But they are also tiny barbarians who scream and fight, grab, kick, and hurt. It is the job of a loving parent to civilize their little barbarian so that they can successfully join the world. As a parent, it is your job to help these small and often insistent little people learn how to voluntarily bring their overwhelming impulses under their own control. And as adults, it is also our job to help the less mature parts of ourself do the same thing. There are 4 lessons that are helpful to consider when first undertaking this daunting task. Lesson 1 is set boundaries and keep to them. It is common for toddlers to resist getting ready on time just when the family is most in a hurry. When it's time to leave the house or to clean up their toys, a toddler will often agree to participate at first, but when it's time to actually start the task and put their jacket on or gather their toys up into the toy box, you will suddenly hear a toddler's favorite word, "No." Then they'll start running around wreaking chaos while you stand there wondering what just happened to make everything suddenly go so wrong. Now at that size, you could catch them and wrestle them into their jacket. But that isn't a viable strategy for the long run. It won't work when the child is 14, much less when they're 40. So you might as well start off with a strategy that can grow with the child. And that is why it is important to teach your child how to control themselves, and why it's important that this be done voluntarily, because force only works for so long. This is an important fact to keep in mind when it comes to dealing with yourself as well. Yes, you can grit your teeth and manhandle your unruly self into doing the things that you want him to do. But the effectiveness of a strategy like that is going to be short-lived. You're not going to be able to maintain that energy across a lifetime. You will burn out and eventually give up. And then chaos will ensue as you sit by watching from a place of helplessness and defeat. And that's not how you want to end up living your life. So as a parent, how do you find the right balance between the reality that we have to do this thing and we need to do it now, versus not wanting to crush your child's independence, autonomy, and curiosity while they are exploring the boundaries of their world? One thing that can help you maintain the right perspective during times like these is to realize that it's incredibly important for children to understand exactly what the rules are that guide the situation that they are currently in. They need to have absolute clarity when it comes to knowing what the principles of engagement are in their world in order for the child to be able to flourish and thrive. It is doing your child no favor at all to plop them down in the middle of this game of life without even bothering to show them what the rules are that will allow them to succeed in that game. Likewise, you need to be very clear with yourself when it comes to your own desires for your life and your expectations for yourself. You need to think about the specific outcomes that you want to achieve. You need to be detailed about your goals and about how exactly you plan to reach them. The bottom line is, you need to be clear about exactly what you want from yourself if you ever hope to end up getting it. Toddlers will use every tactic that is available to them in order to find out what the reality of their situation actually is. Children test their boundaries by pushing their limits and by misbehaving. And you shouldn't be surprised when your own immature self does the same thing to you. Rather than getting frustrated with a child when they decide to test you, even though you're trying to help them, you have to be patient with that natural human need to test our boundaries. But you also need to be firm. You have to strike the same balance when it comes to yourself. There's no need to grow angry and berate yourself for the things that you do to test your own resolve. But you should, without emotion, stand firm in the face of your own resistance to change, and refuse to yield to your own immature attempts to fight against the boundaries that you have decided to put in place in your own life. For example, if a toddler wants a tricycle that another child is riding, they might try to pull that child off of the toy so that they can take it. Once you've put a stop to that and made it clear that they are not going to be allowed to steal that particular toy away from another child, they might test how firm that red line really is by smacking that child's arm, usually as they watch you for your reaction. That is a test of you and of the line that you have just drawn in the sand. You don't need to become angry, but you do need to be firm that these behaviors are not acceptable and they are not going to be tolerated. If you feel yourself getting irritated around a child, if you feel that they are treating you in a way that you don't deserve, if you find yourself feeling resentful towards them or about the responsibilities that you've been saddled with, those are not the sort of things that you want to be feeling about your child. And those are not the attitudes that you want to direct at yourself either. You're not going to be thinking those things unless you're being pushed past your present limits. So you need to be aware of what your own limitations are and when you're beginning to approach them. On the other hand, some parents out there might ask themselves, what right do adults have to intervene in a situation between two young children when their toddler is misbehaving? That is the wrong way of thinking about it, because the reality is that you actually have a responsibility to intervene. You have a responsibility to civilize that tiny tyrant inside of your toddler into becoming the asset to humanity that they truly are. When it comes to dealing with these two options, you need to fight on the side that you actually want to see win. If you're having a disciplinary struggle with your toddler 3 times a day for a half an hour at a time, it can wear you down. If your life seems to regularly consist of your toddler running away from you, throwing his jacket on the floor, going boneless and limp when you catch them, or saying no and coming up with every creative excuse in the book to not pick up their toys, this can quickly become frustrating and overwhelming. It can also be funny. And having a sense of humor about all of this is a very useful tactic to employ. Humor is a fantastic survival tool. You kind of have to admire a toddler's creativity when it comes to misbehaving. Even Jordan recalled putting his own son, Julian, on the naughty steps to discipline him when he was around 3 years old. Jordan told him, "You're going to go sit on the step." And little Julian defiantly answered back, "I want to sit on the steps." Now, if you have a sense of humor, you can appreciate that this is a pretty sophisticated attempt at reverse psychology for a toddler to try to employ in order to squirm out of the situation that he has gotten himself into. Julian wanted to see what would happen next. Could he manipulate his old dad into letting him off? And if not, could he at least bluff his way into appearing to be the one that was in control of his unpleasant fate? Well, unfortunately for toddler Julian, his dad was Jordan Peterson, and Julian had brought a knife to a gunfight. So Jordan told him, "You might want to sit on the steps, but not for as long as I'm going to have you sit there." And that was the end of that little game. Game, set, match to Jordan. But even after all of these years, there was an amused sense of pride that his boy had tried to outwit him when he was only 3 years old. Having a sense of humor about these toddlers' tests is a very good idea. And if you're confident in your ability to win out in the end, it makes it that much easier to see the humor in what they're trying to get away with. The less mature parts of yourself will come up with all sorts of excuses and tricks too. But rather than getting frustrated that change is so difficult for you, try to approach those situations with a bit of humor. Tell yourself, "Nice try," and keep moving forward. The reason that a toddler is not listening to you is because he wants to see where the lines really are. You are only doing the same thing to yourself. You might be naive enough to think that you can discuss the situation rationally with a toddler and reason them into compliance, but you can't. Because they're 3. They don't work that way yet. That doesn't mean you shouldn't reason with them, but you have to understand that is not what is going to get the result right now. They don't want to pay attention to any fences unless they're convinced that there's a reason that they need to. So they are going to find out what that reason is by pushing back. A toddler's conclusion is going to be that if he can push back and that works, then it's not a rule. Likewise, you won't always be able to reason with the part of yourself that is being unreasonable. And the good news is that you don't have to. You just have to be consistent with yourself. Because you're only going to respect your own decisions when you watch yourself stand by them. Very few 3-year-olds try to stand up under a table more than a couple of times. The table is always hard, 100% of the time. So if you bonk your head a couple of times, you usually get the idea. You quickly realize that there is no play in that system, which is why children don't continue to experiment with that particular boundary. Reason identified. No need to keep testing. They get it. The immature version of you will get it too, as soon as it realizes that there is no wiggle room to be found in this particular scenario either. But if there is any possibility of play, a toddler will push and push and push, especially a disagreeable child. So don't set yourself up to be tormented by that cute little savage. One of the best ways that you can raise your kids to feel secure is by having a set of rules that don't change, no matter what. Now you want to keep the number of those rules to a minimum, because there is a certain cost to enforcing them. But kids who get away with everything are actually terrified, because they live in a world without the boundaries or restrictions that keep them safe, and they sense that lack of safety. That limitless world is terrifying for a tiny child. Think about it objectively for a moment. If you were dropped off in the middle of a wilderness, a place with no walls or doors, meaning no shelter, would you feel free, or would you feel exposed? You give your child security when you give them well thought out boundaries. And you're doing yourself a similar favor when you give yourself that same gift. Just like the kid, you'll feel less anxious and more confident within the well thought out boundaries that you decide to set for yourself than you will in a world without them. Boundaries give us something to orient our lives with, and that makes us feel less lost. In addition to living in a state of fear, children who don't have any boundaries also don't tend to get along well with the people around them, and they don't understand themselves in that regard. So by laying down some appropriate rules and enforcing them carefully and thoroughly, you make your kids way more secure and way more socially acceptable. You're not going to damage your child by stepping up and being in charge. That's what parents are there for. Think about it for a moment. You feel more confident as a parent when you've sat down and made a plan so that you know exactly how you're going to handle a situation when it arises. Why wouldn't the same hold true for your child? The idea that knowing what to expect produces security would be even more true for a child, because they are so much more vulnerable in the world than adults are. The other thing that is worth noting about taking charge as a parent is that the best guard against becoming a tyrant is being a unified team. You should really talk to each other as the parents and agree on the disciplinary strategies in your family, because the probability is pretty high that you'll keep each other in check if you are taking this on together. When you're irritated and becoming angry so that you're more prone to go too far, your spouse can step in and vice versa. If you've reached your limits and can feel yourself losing patience, but you know that you can step away while your spouse steps in, that is an excellent pressure release valve. If you can tell your spouse, as soon as the pressure starts becoming too much, that they need to take a moment to cool off and let you step in, without judging them because you've been there too and they've stepped in for you, then things don't ever get out of hand. And if things never get out of hand, then the parents are always able to sincerely be on each other's team. And as parents, you need to be able to tag team each other without being judgmental towards your spouse and without feeling judged by them. And the benefits of having this united front to rely on cuts both ways. If parents are effectively communicating with each other, you'll both stop each other from becoming a tyrant, but being on the same team also stops either of you from being a pushover, because you both understand the proper priorities when it comes to your child and to your family. Parents need to be able to sincerely present a united front to their kids. Tyranny happens when one parent just sits there in silent resentment of what the other is doing. You don't want to be a tyrant, and you don't want to allow your spouse to become one either. Doing that is going to damage your family, your child, and your marriage. So it's important to realize that an excess of tolerance is not a virtue. In the past, the tendency may have tilted more towards tyranny, but the current trend definitely leans in the other direction, and for that reason, that is the trap that most parents today will fall into. Every time your child does something that would make them stand out negatively to their little friends or to your family or to the broader world, it is your job as their parent to let them know, because you want your child to have the skills and the social intelligence that will make them overwhelmingly welcome wherever they go in life. You want them to be equipped in such a way that it will cause them to receive a positive response from the world so that all of its opportunities will open up for them. That is a gift that you want to give your children, and you can't do it alone. Parenting is a team sport. You need to have a united front with regards to the kids, because when they figure out that they can't get away with this particular thing with one parent, they will try the trick of trying to get away with it with the other parent. Then they have split you up. Allowing them to divide and conquer is a seriously bad idea. You will grow to resent each other, and having parents who are pitted against each other is a terrible thing for your child, and you shouldn't allow that to happen to your family. A house divided against itself will not stand. Likewise, you can't become the person that you want to be if you're divided and fighting yourself all of the time. You have to set up your approach to life in such a way that you can actually be on your own side. Now, sometimes, even when toddlers have learned to behave at home, they will revert back to their old rule-breaking behavior when they're out in public or at a friend's house. That's because the toddler wants to find out the answer to two important questions. One, do the rules exist here too? They apply at home, but this isn't home. And two, they are looking around at a whole bunch of different adults, and they want to know, who is in charge here? Does Dad step in the way he does at home? Does Mom step in? Or maybe a completely different set of rules apply in this environment. Maybe this is a place where I can kick up my heels a little bit and get away with something. In other words, they want to know what is socially acceptable in this scenario. A toddler is only going to figure those things out through directly experimenting with them, which is why the stakes are too high to answer his earnest question about what is socially acceptable with a lie. He's not going to come to his conclusions by thinking things through. He's not capable of that yet. He's going to believe what you end up teaching him. In your child's life, you are a proxy for the real world. That is your job. So while you are doing that job, don't lie to that little person who has complete trust in you and set them up to fail. While compensating appropriately for the age of your child, don't be any more tolerant than the world is going to be. That kind of false preparation for life is doing them absolutely no favor. Children aren't sophisticated enough, and neither are most adults, to ask someone outright, "Dad, are the rules the same here in this new situation with these new people around as they would be at home?" And even if a toddler was sophisticated enough to ask that question, as Jordan pointed out, it's far from a given that you'd be sophisticated enough to be able to answer a question like that with equal candor. Children have to play their questions out in the world, so they are going to push until they get a solid answer that they can rely on. Expect that, and recognize it for what it is. Don't make the mistake of assigning some malicious intent behind their behavior. If you bring your child to a new situation and they misbehave, use the same tactics that you would use at home and bring it to a halt. Likewise, you are going to have setbacks in your own journey precisely when you don't want them. You need to expect that. And when it happens, you need to recognize it for what it is and not turn it into something bigger and more meaningful. You also need to be very careful not to lie to yourself in those moments, and thus set yourself up to have that same problem repeat and multiply all over the future that you are trying to build for yourself. You need to treat yourself in accordance with reality concerning the way that the world is going to treat you. Embarrassment can drive us to handle things badly when problems arise in order to get them over with quickly. But in the long run, that is a very bad trade-off to make with yourself. So instead, step up and take responsibility for yourself in the moment. Then you'll be able to hold your head high in the mirror afterwards, and the problem will actually have gotten resolved instead of delayed. The other thing you'll find is that the more effective you are at laying out these disciplinary rules, especially for aggressive kids, the more they will actually like you for it. It's counterintuitive, but it's also really cool to see for yourself how true it is. And you will like yourself more as well if you can respect yourself. That one is obvious. All of this may sound great in theory, but for a novice, it's hard to know exactly when you should step in and discipline your child when you find yourself in the middle of a real situation. A good place to start when you're trying to answer that question is when both of you as the parents don't like what the toddler is doing. And you should also act when the toddler is making you irritable or when their behavior is making you feel resentful. After all, your child has to get along with you for their own world to go well. So you're doing them a favor by bringing their behavior into line with your expectations. That way, you aren't having a bad experience and then turning around and creating a bad experience for your child. Now, of course, anything can be taken to the extreme. You do need to honestly evaluate if the problem is you because it very well could be. Practice being self-aware. Ask yourself, is your spouse or the other adults that are around irritated too? If it's you, then take responsibility for owning that. But if it is the child, then nip it in the bud. Your job as a parent is to encourage your child to be maximally socially acceptable by the time they're 4 years old, when their peer group will start to become the primary influence on their socialization above their family. Don't let your child do anything that makes you dislike them. And don't make the mistake of thinking you could never come to dislike your own child. Even worse, don't make the mistake of believing that other people could never dislike your child. That is lying to yourself. And by extension, it's lying to your child. If you allow your toddler to act in ways that are dislikable, not sharing, not taking proper turns, being self-centered, having no empathy, and never trying to see things from the other person's point of view, then they are not going to thrive among the most social species on the entire planet. Narcissism, as its root, is really a state of prolonged immaturity. Let's read over that list again and you'll see it. Not sharing, not taking proper turns, being self-centered, having no empathy, and never trying to see things from the other person's point of view. It's narcissism. And narcissism becomes more pathological with intensity and the longer that it is allowed to continue. Likewise, you also need to be able to determine when it is time to get a firm grip on yourself. When you don't like your own behavior, or it is having a negative impact on how you are experiencing yourself or the world, then it is time to straighten yourself out. What you're really trying to accomplish by setting up appropriate expectations through establishing boundaries and imposing disciplinary rituals is to help your child understand how to conduct themselves in the world in such a way that people will be extremely happy to have them around, including the people outside of their family, which is where they will end up spending most of their life. You want to teach your toddler how to interact successfully with other human beings so that they can cooperate and even compete with other people in a manner that is productive and positive. As their parents, you have the lowest bar in the world for being able to love this little person, no matter what their behavior is. You also have the highest bar for what you will tolerate and excuse in them. No one in the whole world is going to outdo you when it comes to loving and accepting your child. So if your child is annoying you and your spouse, despite the fact that you love him or her, then the probability that they are annoying everyone else with their behavior, the people who don't feel the same overwhelming sense of care for them, is extremely high. And you want to give your child the gift of being maximally socially desirable. The only alternative is to condemn them to a miserable experience of an empty life. Permit me to give you a brief example of why all of this is important and where it can actually lead to. I recently saw a video online of a woman at a protest. She looked to be in her mid-30s. Yet, she had stripped down to her bra and panties, gone completely limp in the middle of the street, and then she laid there in the crosswalk, flailing and kicking and screaming exactly like a toddler would. She was not mentally ill. This was her idea of an adult protest. When asked what she was protesting, she just continued thrashing around and rolling in the filth of the street as she shrieked to gain attention. This middle-aged woman was acting exactly like an uncivilized toddler. When it comes to the task of teaching your kids to be socially acceptable to the other members of their species, for the sake of their own happiness, by the way, this woman's parents couldn't have failed her more. And as a result, I'm sure that this woman is very alone in her life, because no one with any sense is going to want to be around a 200-plus pound toddler. So please, don't doom your own child to that tragic, maladjusted existence. And don't doom yourself to it either by ignoring the things that you don't like about yourself instead of dealing with them and making any changes that are needed for you to have a fuller, better life for yourself. So what improvements can you expect to see in your parental life by following the tips that were outlined in this lesson? If you set boundaries and keep to them, your household will become a chain of islands of predictability that are surrounded by an ocean of play and freedom. People will know what is going on and why, and that means that they'll feel secure. They'll know what's good and what is not, and you'll be able to cooperate and compete together in a joyful manner. To sum up, if you want children that you actually like to have around, set boundaries and keep to them. And if you set reasonable expectations and boundaries for yourself as well, your own life will have the stability that you need to be able to enjoy your freedom. You will know what you expect from yourself, and the people around you will know what to expect from you too. You will discover what works for you and what doesn't, and with that knowledge, you'll be able to continue refining and fine-tuning your life into something that is consistently becoming better and better. All of this will cause you to be able to cooperate and compete with the people around you in a way that is productive and in a way that also produces joy, meaning that people will actually like having you around and you'll be more fulfilled in your own experience of life. We're going to cover the 3 remaining lessons of toddlerhood next week, and you're not going to want to miss those. And in the weeks that follow, we will be taking a look at the best way to teach responsibility to adolescents and to ourselves. We will also be considering what the future holds for all of us by looking at the effects of raising our daughters on social media and by looking at what is happening to our sons in the digital age, and then discussing what parents can realistically do to save their children from the downsides of this modern fate. We will also cover strategies for helping children survive both bullying and peer pressure. And we will take an in-depth look at the lost art of resilience. So I very much hope that you will keep coming back. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I very much hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking the like and follow buttons, because that is what does the trick in making these things successful. And I very much hope that you will come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.